Hello and good day, Prime Minister Trudeau. My headaches continue to get worse. Collapsing and waking up multiple times a day, unable to see and use my left side for long periods of time, is getting worse. My speech is tanking and my friends are noticing problems. I don't have any more time to spend explaining my trafficking experience between 2017 and 2019. There are two more issues that are more important to public safety to cover. Those issues are much more documented, much better, so I believe I can get through them faster. This video is intended to be my last on the topic of my trafficking experience. If you've made it through the graphic nature of the first 12 videos about my human and sex trafficking experience between 2017 and 2019, it would be easy to dismiss it as impossible. The Liverpool RCMP certainly have, and my own family certainly has. I don't have any more time to go into any more detail. There are additional records in my GitHub repository under my name if any investigation wants those resources or those records. Those documents are from the last few years, and much of the written work was done over a year ago when I could still write. Prime Minister Trudeau, if you take a step back and look at the big picture of my trafficking experience, I am a walking cliche. I've compiled this information from Stats Canada reports that are easily available on the internet. I have rounded up some of the numbers to simply make the math easier to talk about. The population of Canada in 2023 was 40 million. In 2017, the year that I was kidnapped, 1 in every 10,000 people in Canada would be kidnapped. The rate of reported rapes in 2021 was 1 in 20 for women and 1 in 100 for men. A different section of Stats Canada indicates that only 1 in 20 rapes are actually reported. In terms of human trafficking, Canada is at its highest at 1.4 incidents per 100,000 people, which is a little less than 600 people in Canada each year. Nova Scotia, where I was held, has the highest rate of human trafficking in Canada. It's double what the national average is. If you look at that second area of Stats Canada, the one that lists that only 1 in 20 rapes are actually reported to the police, it also lists that 1 in 10 rapes result in permanent injuries. I'm certainly that. This same section of Stats Canada reports that 4 out of every 5 rapes occur in the home. I can check that box. And that 4 out of 5 rapes are committed by a family member or a close friend. I can check that box. That transgendered individuals are at the highest risk of sexual assaults. Yes, that was the basis of almost everything that was done to me. And that 4 in 5 disabled women are sexually assaulted in the course of their life. This same Stats Canada website goes on to list different minorities and different disadvantaged people, indicating that anyone with any form of disability is at a higher risk of general assault, abuse, and specifically sexual assault. I am a walking cliche for all of that. Prime Minister Trudeau, these statistics are from a recent report released in Ontario, that half of all rape victims don't want the experience of dealing with law enforcement, that half of all rape victims want the matter kept private, that 1 in 5 fear disbelief, that 1 in 5 fear victim blaming. That original statistic, that only 1 in 20 rapes are reported, that means that 19 out of 20 go unreported. The recent report out of Ontario highlights that in the final report from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, listed one of the most significant factors in not reporting rape and similar sexual assaults was the extreme distrust of law enforcement and the legal system. Prime Minister Trudeau, for 25 years, I investigated physical and sexual predators for my employers, mostly governments, in 18 foreign countries in their education systems. One of the ways I justified that level of risk and violence in my life, to myself, was me telling myself every time I had to deal with these sorts of situations that the RCMP were in Canada protecting my family from similar experiences. That is no longer true, Prime Minister Trudeau. After my experiences with the RCMP following my own trafficking experience, I have lost, completely and totally, all faith and belief in the RCMP. I was gone for 2.5 decades, essentially my entire adult life. I was brought back to Canada illegally and held for 2 years, and I have only been free for 3. I have only been free to interact with the RCMP for 3 years. The handful of constables that I have met in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, that appear to be doing their best, they don't even come close to countering the damage done by the RCMP in Liverpool, who will find any excuse to not do their most basic function, to not take a statement from a witness or take a statement from the victim of a violent crime. No amount of good that I've seen some constables perform counters the danger the RCMP have subjected my community to out of their selfish desire to avoid dealing with an undesirable segment of society. In August of 2022, I had to listen to a lower court judge in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, throw out all documentation, evidence, and case files produced by the supervisors of the Liverpool detachment of the RCMP. The judge at that time stated in open court that it has been his experience that the RCMP in general, the Liverpool RCMP specifically, will lie to witnesses and victims just to avoid dealing with an undesirable segment of the population. Having to listen to a judge state this as a commonly held truth has only cemented my loss of faith in the RCMP. The last portion of this video, Prime Minister Trudeau, the last time I intend to discuss the trafficking incident, is going to be a brief account of what happened to me when I was required to walk into an RCMP station and report my own rape. Prime Minister Trudeau, I was released from captivity on April 22, 2019. I had been prevented from filing taxes, applying for health care, or going to doctors, dentists, or hospitals for 2 years, while living with and being subjected to 4 terminal medical issues, multiple curable life-threatening injuries, multiple attempts on my life, and a host of injuries, including having my shoulder dislocated twice in the 6 weeks prior to my release. I had been in contact with community and victim services as well as other charitable organizations and individuals for the last 5 months of my captivity. I contacted them after the incident in which all of my deceased son's funeral possessions were destroyed. These organizations arranged housing in Liverpool, as well as access to and housing at the closest men's shelter, which was in Halifax. I knew that I would not survive the violence of a men's shelter, and I knew that I would not survive the violence of homelessness in Halifax. The housing in Liverpool was allegedly, and I can assure you that it was not, on a quiet street. The housing in Liverpool was opposite of a local funeral home, and that fit both my wildly dark sense of humor and the belief that I could die at any moment. I continued to have serious seizures all throughout 2019. They've never gone away, but for a short period of time they did subside a little. My first action, Prime Minister Trudeau, upon being released, and this is easily verifiable by your government, was to file my taxes for the 2 years I was held captive. This allowed me to apply for health care, and once my health care was approved, I went to a doctor. Or technically, I went to a hospital because there is a massive doctor shortage in Liverpool. And I would like to take a moment to highlight, to double underline the doctor shortage in Liverpool. Only yesterday, Prime Minister Trudeau, a close friend called because it was my birthday. But she called to ask me about her experience in the hospital system. Earlier that year, she had feared that she was having a stroke because of some symptoms she was having, and she knew that I had also recently had a stroke. When she thought she was having them because her symptoms matched mine, she went to the Liverpool hospital to find it closed. The ER was closed. Her own family had to take her to Bridgewater, where she sat from 7 p.m. at night until 10 a.m. the next day. That is the state of healthcare in Nova Scotia at the moment. But in 2019, I went to the hospital as one of the 19 in 20 rape victims that didn't want to report anything to the RCMP for all of the cliché reasons that are listed in all of the reports that I have summarized or mentioned earlier in this video. I just wanted to recover from my injuries enough to return to my life overseas so that I could die overseas and never explain any of this to anyone. Over the course of 2019, some of my temporary or minor injuries healed, but many were permanent and too serious for me to ever pass a medical again. I would never be able to work abroad again. By the time COVID arrived, it was already guaranteed that I was trapped in Canada until my death. By August of 2019, medical professionals were repeatedly ordering me to report the source of my injuries to the RCMP, as they had already done so, as they were required to by law. These medical professionals repeatedly explained that it would go better, that it would be easier for me if I voluntarily reported what had happened to me to the RCMP. And that is not how my visit to the RCMP played out. In 2019, I hadn't been in Canada for 2.5 decades. I'd been held captive in Beach Meadows for 2 years, but I didn't get to interact with Canada at that time. And in 2019, I didn't know that the RCMP lied to and intimidated victims as easily as I would soon learn, just so the RCMP could avoid some paperwork, so they could avoid dealing with a segment of society that they didn't like. I didn't know that the RCMP would hate dealing with me because of my civic address. I didn't know that they would assume and mistreat me because they would believe I was on welfare. I wasn't. I didn't know that they would assume and mistreat me for the false assumption that I was a welfare fraud, that I was a liar and a troublemaker, like they believed that all the other tenants at my civic address were. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that my apartment was as inexpensive as it was because it is in one of the most violent and despised buildings in Liverpool. In 2019, I didn't know any of that. I sat for an interview with the RCMP because I was told to. Medical professionals told me to. The interview lasted perhaps 15 or 20 minutes before I was thrown out and told never to return. An RCMP constable told me, "Don't bother coming back. No one here," meaning the RCMP station, "would ever help me." My original Serious Incident Response Team application detailing this exchange is stored in my GitHub repository with my other CERT applications. In this original interaction with the RCMP, I described the constable making numerous errors in the written report they were taking. My interview was also recorded digitally, and I can be heard on that recording in the beginning of the interview correcting the constable, because I can read upside down and backwards across the table like many teachers and parents. It was not until a Bridgewater judge in 2022 explained that the RCMP lying in a written report is commonplace, that it is an accepted practice when a constable wants to avoid an undesirable segment of society, or in my case, they want to avoid dealing with a welfare recipient. And again, Prime Minister Trudeau, I was not on welfare. You can hear on this recorded interview that the constable immediately grows frustrated at being corrected, and when the exact nature of the crimes I'm trying to relay becomes known, that being international trafficking, abduction, rape, and torture, I was met with a deluge of, "You didn't do enough violence to be a victim of that. You didn't try hard enough to get away. You didn't do enough to stop what was happening, or what you claim was happening. During the interview, the constable repeatedly told me that the most they could record, the most they could act on, was alleged elder abuse of my uncle, and that was not an RCMP matter, that the constable would take my report and forward it to Adult Protective Services, but that they would be unable to do anything, because it wasn't an RCMP matter. Prime Minister Trudeau, my experiences are unusual, and as an individual, to my knowledge, they are unparalleled in Canada. David Reimer's situation was not this violent. Eden Knight, the Saudi national, her situation was not this violent. There has been no one and nothing like me as an individual. Not my childhood, and not having had that done twice. I know of no other examples of childhood rape and mutilation of an individual on the scale that it was done to me. I know of no other examples where that person was then trafficked as an adult by the same rapists, only to have worse versions of that rape and mutilation carried out again. I realize, Prime Minister Trudeau, that other people, in other ways, have much worse experiences than I have. I realize that entire segments of the population have had worse experiences than I have. But there's been nothing like me as an individual, There's been nothing like me as an individual, Prime Minister Trudeau, and the RCMP have filed it away as elder abuse because they hate dealing with people on welfare. I wasn't on welfare. All I wanted was to recover from my injuries enough to pass medicals for work permits and leave Canada. All I wanted was to be a cliché, to not tell anyone anything. And as far as clichés go, Prime Minister Trudeau, it only gets worse. In 2019, the Liverpool RCMP were refusing to investigate the trafficking that I tried to report, and the worse events that I tried to report. They were refusing to investigate, so I saw no need to tell my family what had happened. I was still hoping I would heal enough to leave the country and never have to tell anyone. None of that happened. In 2021, I testified against a man that threatened 2 mass shootings in April and May of 2021 in Liverpool, Nova Scotia. I was testifying in civil court because the RCMP told me to. I was testifying in civil court because the RCMP told me that a criminal investigation was going on, but that it would take longer, and that a peace bond would be the fastest way for my immediate protection. I did not know at that time, Prime Minister Trudeau, that the RCMP were lying about the criminal investigations. The man that made the threat of the mass shootings, and others, in retaliation for my testimony, made multiple attempts on my life in late 2021. This cost me the use of my right hand and arm. In January of 2022, more attempts were made in retaliation for my testimony, and I was being subjected to what the media will recognize as a Starlight Tour by the Liverpool RCMP in retaliation for the serious incident response team applications I had filed. I hope, Prime Minister Trudeau, you understand the Saskatchewan reference. Fearing my death at the hands of both violent assaults, in February of 2022, I wrote my siblings to give them a brief account of my captivity as a means of warning them about my rapists, and to ask them if they had any questions for me. My own siblings, Prime Minister Trudeau, wrote me to tell me that men can't be raped, that I, more than ordinary men, because of my demeanor and experience, can't be raped, and that I made the entire thing up just to get attention. This, Prime Minister Trudeau, is how rape victims are treated in your country.